Welcome to the final chapter reading of Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. We are on chapter 15, part 2. I'm going to pick up where we left off at the top of this page. After being refused by several schools because of my age, I was finally accepted at African Bible College and Christian Academy, ABCCA, in Lilongwe, which was run by Presbyterian missionaries. The headmaster, Chuck Wilson, was an American from California, and my teacher, Laura Lee McLean, was from Canada. Although I was behind the other students, Mrs. McLean and Mr. Wilson agreed to take a chance on admitting me. But Mrs. McLean had one condition, that when I left school each day, I didn't go home to poverty. I had to find a place to live in Lilongwe. Since I had no relatives in town, Jerry offered me a room at his house. I had my own bed and a desk for studying, and the housekeeper Nancy prepared plenty of Nasima and relish so I didn't feel homesick. Everything was great, but because we were in the city, we experienced power cuts several times a week. After all that hardship to bring electricity to my village, here I was sitting in the dark in my success. "You should carry a windmill everywhere you go," Jerry joked. Over time, Jerry became a great friend and teacher. When he still lived in England, he flew airplanes and worked as a helicopter mechanic, so I always asked him questions about motors and such. Sometimes after dinner, he explained how helicopters worked, how the spinning blades captured wind to lift the heavy machines, and how the back rotors kept them from spinning in circles. Jerry also helped me with my English, particularly my L's and R's, something we Chichewa speakers always get confused. These lessons were sometimes done in front of the bathroom mirror, so Jerry could demonstrate. "Okay, William, watch my tongue and say library, liblely, library, liblely. You'll get it." My class at ABCCA used a distant learning curriculum from America that we learned by computer over the internet. Just a couple months before, I'd never even seen the web, and now I used it every day to speak with teachers in Colorado. At first, I was ashamed of my poor English, especially after hearing 5-year-old children speak better sentences. During my first few days, I became quite depressed, but my tutor, a Malawian named Blessings Chakula, offered some great encouragement. Mr. Blessings had also come from a poor village near Doha, so poor that he was 30 years old before he got a college degree. Now he was working at ABCCA as a teacher. "Don't be discouraged and give up just because it's hard," Mr. Blessings told me. "Whatever you want to do, if you do with all your heart, it will happen." Eventually, the money from my donors at TED allowed me to help my family in many other ways. I installed iron sheets on our compound to replace the grass roofs. I bought mattresses so my sisters didn't have to sleep on the dirt floor, plus covered water buckets to protect our drinking supply from pests. I bought better blankets to keep us warm at night in winter, malaria pills and mosquito nets for the rainy season, and I arranged to send everyone in my family to the doctor and dentist. And for once, I finally managed to repay Gilbert for all the help he'd given me. Several years before, Gilbert's father had died, and he'd had to drop out of school for lack of money. So with my donations, I put Gilbert back in school along with Jeffrey and several other cousins who dropped out during the famine. I even paid the neighbors' kids' tuition. And after years of dreaming about it, I was finally able to drill a borehole for a deep well, which gave my family clean drinking water. My mother said this saved her 2 hours each day carrying water from the public well. Using a solar-powered pump, I filled 2 giant tanks and piped water to my father's field. Irrigation allowed us to plant a second maize crop. The storage room would never be empty again. The spigot from the borehole was also free for all the women in Wimbe to use. It's the only running water for miles around, and each day dozens of women come to my home to fill their buckets with clean, cool water without having to pump and pump. During my holidays from school, I constructed a bigger windmill that pumped water, which I called the Green Machine on account of its color. That pump now sits above the shallow well at home and irrigates a garden where my mother grows spinach, carrots, tomatoes, and potatoes, both for my family to eat and to sell at market. Finally, the dream had been accomplished. My family couldn't have imagined that the little windmill I built during the famine would change their lives in every way, and they saw this change as a gift from heaven. Whenever I came home on weekends, my parents had a new nickname. They called me Noah, like the man in the Bible who built the ark, saving his family from God's flood. Everyone laughed at Noah, but look what happened, Mother said. My father agreed. "You've put us on the map. Now the world knows we're here." In December 2007, I went to the United States to see the windmills of California, just like the ones in my textbook back home. I landed in New York City right in the middle of water, wearing only a sweater. The woman at the airline counter then informed me that they'd lost all my luggage. "We'll call you," she said. Huh? I didn't even have a phone. Some of Tom's friends met me at the airport. As the taxi pulled out, I finally saw the great American city I'd read so much about. We drove over smooth roads with several lanes in each direction, across bridges with no water underneath, followed by more roads and more bridges. The tall buildings in the distance appeared so pressed together that it was hard to imagine people walking between them, much less building them. It just so happened that Tom lived in one of those buildings in Lower Manhattan. His apartment was on the 36th floor, and I wondered how we would ever get up there. One of his friends then showed me the elevator. "What is that?" I asked. I pushed the button, and in 10 seconds I was 36 floors up in the sky. Already I had so many questions. Inside, Tom greeted me heartily. His apartment was surrounded by windows, looking as if you could walk right over the edge. Before that day, the highest it had ever been besides an airplane was the top of my windmill. It took some time to adjust, and that night I had trouble sleeping. The next day I went underground in the subway, where I watched people enter the gates using sliding money cards. Another great idea. The sidewalks of New York left me exhausted, with hundreds of people running in every direction. One of the things I noticed in New York is that people don't have time for anything, not even to sit down for coffee. Instead, they drink it from paper cups while they walk and send text messages. Sometimes they walk right into you. Touring the city, I began to wonder how Americans could build a skyscraper in a year, but in 4 decades of independence, Malawi couldn't even bring clean water to a village. We could send witch planes into the skies and ghost trucks along the roads, but we couldn't even keep electricity in our homes. We always seemed to be struggling to catch up. Even with so many smart and hardworking people, we were still living and dying like our ancestors. The following week, I flew to California and visited the San Diego Wild Animal Park, where I saw giraffes, hippos, and elephants for the first time. Just a half hour from my home in Wimbe was the Kasungu National Park, where all of these same animals lived in the wild, but it took me flying 10,000 miles to America to finally see them up close. I had to laugh. But of all the places I went, nothing impressed me more than the windmills of Palm Springs. For a moment after entering the wind farm, I felt like I was back home. The setting was familiar, lush green flatland and mountains in the distance, and all of it draped in a bright blue sky. But here, in that empty space between me and the hills, were miles upon miles of windmills. More than 6,000 of them shooting from the ground like giant mechanical trees. The round white trunks were like cartoons I'd seen on television, so big around they could fit my family's entire house. Looking up, I saw the 100-foot blades twirling slowly like the toys of God. Each one stood 200 feet in the air, with a wingspan longer than the airplane that had brought me to America. The head engineer of the farm took me inside of the machines, where computer screens revealed all kinds of information, everything from voltage output to wind and blade speed. In total, the wind farm produced more than 6,000 megawatts, which was delivered to thousands of homes by underground cable. By comparison, just 600 megawatts could light up all of Malawi with energy to spare. At the time, Eskom produced only 224 megawatts. It was an incredible feeling to see the machines that I'd imagined for so long. Now here they were, twisting in the wind before me. I realized I'd come full circle. The pictures in the book had provided the idea, Hunger and Darkness gave me inspiration, and I'd embarked myself on this long and amazing journey. Standing there, I waited for direction. What would I do next? What was in my future? Looking across the field of windmills, I saw how the mountains seemed to tumble and dance along their twirling blades. They seemed to be telling me something, that I didn't have to decide right away. I could return to Africa and go back to school. After that, who knows? Perhaps I would study these machines and learn how to build them, then plant my own forest of mechanical trees in Malawi. Perhaps I could even teach people how to build simpler devices like I had at home, so they could provide their own light and water. Perhaps I'd do both. Whatever I decided to do, this lesson would always stay with me. If you want to make it, all you have to do is try. And that is the end of our story. Next week, you'll read the epilogue, which is like the post-chapter of the book, and then there'll be a few activities for you to complete as we conclude up this book.